My name is Marin, and I was 34 years old the morning I learned my own family had already spent my inheritance without telling me a single word about it. I was standing on Elderwood Avenue in Birch Hollow, Michigan, with my rucksack still digging into my shoulder, staring at a storefront that had no business existing. Gold script on black glass, a brand new awning, my dead grandmother's name hanging over a restaurant that belonged to my sister. Grandma June had left me her lake house, $500,000 of pine board and shoreline. My name, typed out plainly in her will, in a sentence a lawyer once read aloud to the whole family with a straight face. My parents sold it. My sister spent it. And then my sister texted me 4 words like she was doing me a favor. Thanks for your service. I didn't answer her. I didn't answer anyone. What I did instead took 11 months. It cost every dollar I owned, and nearly every person I came home to see. And it ended in a county courthouse with my sister sliding out of her chair onto the floor. Welcome to Quiet Reckonings, the channel where the ones who never raise their voice finally do, and the family finds out exactly what silence was worth. If any part of this sounds like your own kitchen table, drop it in the comments. And subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this one lands. Fort Halloway to Birch Hollow is 600 and change, 10 hours if you don't stop, and I never stop. I drove through the night the way I've driven through everything for 12 years, because darkness doesn't ask questions and truck stop coffee at 3 a.m. doesn't care who you used to be. I'm a combat medic, 12 years in, staff sergeant since 29. The job leaves a mark you can't scrub off. I count other people's breathing without meaning to. Cashiers, strangers at a bar, my own mother mid-sentence. Some part of my brain is always timing somebody's chest, waiting for it to go wrong. I had a rucksack, boots that had crossed 2 continents, and a small brass key on my dog tag chain. My grandmother mailed me that key when I was 27 and stationed outside Kandahar, a padded envelope, a Michigan postmark, and a note in handwriting so heavy it had gone through 3 pages. For whenever you get tired of being useful. I laughed it off then. I wore it through 2 more deployments anyway, through a lot of places that didn't have lakes. Here's the family ledger, and you should have it up front, because everything that follows is really just people arguing about arithmetic. 12 years. 9 trips home. $400 a month, every month, wired from whatever base I happened to be sleeping on, for my mother's medication, for my father's roof, once for my sister's stove. I never missed a payment. I also never once asked my family for anything. Hold on to that, because a woman who never asks for help isn't generous. She's just found an expensive way to stay far away. I'd been home exactly once in 4 years, 4 days of emergency leave for my grandmother's funeral, then a flight straight back out. That was 11 months ago. 4 days out of 19 months. My father can do that math too. He has. And honestly, he's not wrong too. This time, I wasn't driving up for a funeral. I was driving up because I'd finally asked my sister a direct question, and she'd finally given me an answer. I hit Elderwood Avenue at 6:40 in the morning, which in Birch Hollow means the bakery light is on and nothing else is. I knew every storefront on that block the way you know your own handwriting. The hardware store, the insurance office with the dying fern in the window, and where the old video rental place used to sit, where I'd paid late fees in crumpled paper route money, there was now a restaurant. Not a diner. A restaurant. Reclaimed wood, filament bulbs still glowing from the night shift, black and cream signage somebody had paid real money to have made. Across the top, in gold letters, June's table. Beside the register, blown up bigger than life and lit from underneath like a shrine, was my grandmother's face. I took that photograph myself, on leave for her 75th birthday, because she refused to trust anyone's phone but insisted on her own camera. Now she was hanging in a window on Main Street, watching over the town she'd complained about for 50 years, selling somebody's brunch special. I stood there 4 full minutes with my rucksack still on. A woman walked her dog past me and said good morning, and I didn't answer, which isn't like me at all. Here's what wouldn't fit together in my head. My grandmother died 11 months ago. This restaurant had been open for 6 weeks. The paint was so fresh I could smell it from the sidewalk. Which meant that while I was in Poland running sick call and eating cold dining hall eggs, my sister Dana, who had washed dishes in this town since she was 15 and never once had more than a few $1,000s to her name, had somehow put $340,000 into a building. Dana never had that kind of money. Nobody in my family ever had that kind of money. So where does a woman like my sister find money like that? I already knew, if I was honest with myself. I'd known since May. Picture a base outside Poznan, gray sky, gray concrete. A latrine that happened to be the only spot on the whole compound with signal strong enough to load a photo. That's where I was standing, boots off, feet against cold tile, when my sister's text landed at 11 at night. She sent a picture first, scaffolding, a half-hung awning, her standing in the middle of it with her arms thrown wide and her hair pulled up, grinning like a kid on a diving board. She was happy. That's the part people always leave out of stories like this. She was genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. Underneath, she wrote that they were opening in a few weeks, that she'd named the place after Grandma June, that she wished I could see it in person. I typed back the only question that actually mattered to me: where did the money come from? I watched the three dots appear. They pulsed for far longer than the answer should have needed. Then they vanished. Then they came back. What finally landed was this: thanks for your service. That was the entire reply. And here's the thing that took me the better part of a year to actually understand: there was no blade hidden in it. My sister meant it warmly. The way you'd say it to a big sister stationed far away doing something honorable. The way the guy at the gas station says it when he clocks your plates. She thought she was being kind. That's what still knocks the wind out of me, months later. I set the phone face down on the edge of the sink, laced my boots back up, and went and covered someone else's shift. It would take another 8 weeks before I understood exactly what my sister thought she was thanking me for. My parents still live on Hollies Street, just off Main, in the house I grew up in. I went for dinner my first night home because that's simply what you do. Pot roast. Napkins folded into precise triangles. The same wall clock. The same worn brown recliner with the same permanent dent in the cushion. Everything frozen exactly as I'd left it at 22, which should feel comforting and instead feels like standing inside a photograph. My mother, Carol, is 61 and has been the church secretary at Trinity Lutheran for 23 years. She has exactly one sentence about me, and she used it 3 separate times in 40 minutes. "We're so proud of her, not proud of you," said to my father. Said to the pot roast. Said to the whole room while I sat 8 feet away holding a fork like a prop. My mother has discussed me in the third person for the entirety of my adult life. It's a strange thing, being a photograph that got up and walked itself to dinner. My father, Walt, is 63, a retired road commission foreman with hands like split cordwood. He barely spoke all evening. The one thing he asked me was whether I'd been sleeping. It was the only question anyone asked all night that had a real answer waiting behind it, and I didn't have a good one, so I lied and said fine. Then I set my fork down and asked about the lake house, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. My mother suddenly found something urgent to do at the sink. My father looked at me for a long, quiet moment with no anger in his face at all, which was somehow worse than anger. Then he said it, flat and even, the way he used to tell a road crew a lane was closed. "It's handled, Marin, not sold, not settled, not decided. Handled." My father chooses his words the way he chose every plank on every job site for 40 years, deliberately. I sat there with the clock ticking behind me and tried to work out what exactly he believed he'd handled. You'd expect him to get defensive here. He didn't. He got up, walked to the hutch, and came back with a binder, blue cover, 3 rings, carefully tabbed, organized the way a man organizes 40 years of county paperwork. He set it in front of me and slid it across the table. "Look at all of it," he said. "I've got nothing hidden from you." And he meant every word. That's the thing about my father that cost me 11 months and $31,000 to finally understand. He has never once hidden anything, because hiding is what you do when some part of you suspects you've done something wrong. He never suspected that. Not for 1 second. Page 4, sale of real property, listed address, $55,000 March of last year. My grandmother's house, reduced to a price and a date, typed neatly in a courier font. Page 6 wasn't typed. Page 6 was handwritten in block capitals, pressed so hard into the paper you could read the impression from the back of the sheet. The printing of a man who's been filling out incident reports since before I was born. Reimburse. Meant for caregiving, 19 months, $118,000. I read that line maybe 6 times. My father hadn't stolen a cent from his own mother's estate. My father had invoiced it. He'd sat at this very table with this very pen and priced out 19 months of lifting her, crushing her pills into applesauce, listening through the wall for the sound of her choking. And then he'd written himself a bill and filed that bill in a labeled binder where anyone could find it, because in his mind, he'd done a job, and a job gets paid. My hands stayed steady. I want that on the record. I flipped back to page 5 because there was a line there I'd skimmed past too fast the first time. Before I tell you what was on page 5, you need one afternoon from 6 years earlier. Cedarline Lake, the dock, water flat as glass. Grandma June was 83 and still driving, still cursing under her breath when a leech slipped out of the bait bucket, still baking her own pie crust purely out of spite for anyone who bought theirs. I was 28, home on 9 days' leave. She handed me a manila folder with her new will inside and told me to read the section she'd marked in pencil, so hard it had bled through 3 sheets underneath. The lake house, the lot, the frontage, all of it, to my granddaughter Marin Colby by name. I actually argued with her. I told her to give it to Dana instead. Grandma, she's here, she'll use it, I'm never home. My grandmother didn't answer right away. She fished the leech out of the bucket, threaded it onto the hook, dropped the line, and watched the water take it. Then she said the sentence I would carry through 2 more deployments and 1 courtroom without understanding a single word of it. Don't let them pay you in nice words, Rin. That was all, no explanation. I was 28 and I laughed it off as old woman talk, the kind of line you nod along to and let pass. Okay, Grandma, I said. I mean it, she said back. Then she caught a bass and forgot about me for the next 20 minutes. But she'd said it like she was reading it off a page that already existed, like she already knew the exact shape of something that hadn't happened yet. It would take me 6 more years and a small mountain of legal fees to find out just how right she was. Back at the table, the pot roast going cold, I said, she left it to me, Dad. My name is in the will, she wrote my name. My father never raises his voice, that's not how he does damage. He reached over, turned the binder back around, and opened it to page 5. Consent to sale of specifically devised property dated February 12th. And on the signature line, in that same heavy block print, Walter R. Colby, attorney-in-fact for Marin E. Colby. Attorney-in-fact, for me. Nobody forged a single thing. I need to be completely clear about that because I spent a lot of long nights wishing they had. A forgery would have been simple. A forgery has a name, a police report, a person you're allowed to hate. This wasn't that. This was my father using a document I had walked into an office and signed myself, of my own free will, in front of a notary and a coffee-stained counter. I handed him the pen. That's the whole story right there. I couldn't say that sentence out loud for another 6 months. And while I sat there with all the blood in my body sinking down toward my boots, my mother said the kindest, warmest, most devastating thing anyone said to me that entire year. She said it from the sink, over running water, without a trace of malice, because she genuinely believed she was helping me understand. You weren't here, honey. Somebody had to sign. And that's when I remembered the room. Fluorescent lights, worn carpet, 40 soldiers packed into a hallway, and the specific smell of a copier that had been running nonstop for 2 days. Every soldier who deploys signs a power of attorney. Every single one. It isn't naivety, it isn't sentiment, it's a checkbox between the dental exam and the will. Without one, your rear detachment can't pay your rent, can't move your truck, can't stop the utility company from cutting the power on a house you're not standing in. 6 days before Wheels Up, our departure window shifted almost a week earlier than planned. 40 of us crowded into that hallway, 2 exhausted paralegal specialists, a towering stack of forms. I did the thing you're supposed to do. I asked for a limited power of attorney. I only need the apartment and the truck, I said twice. The specialist, 11 hours into his shift, looked up and told me a limited one takes 2 weeks to draft and I was flying out Tuesday. Everybody's signing the general. It was 10 minutes to 5. I signed the general. That night I called my father from the parking lot and told him, word for word, only the apartment and the truck, Dad. And my father said, understood. Here's the part that took me 11 months to survive. He wasn't lying to me. My father has never told. A lie in his life, he simply doesn't have the wiring for it. He said understood and he meant it completely. And then, 16 months later, he sat down at the same kitchen table and signed away a house I had a legal right to. If you'd asked him that morning whether he was an honest man, he'd have said yes without hesitation, and he'd have been telling the truth. I found him in the garage the next morning, changing oil in a truck that didn't need it. He didn't look up. He talked to the underside of that engine for 4 straight minutes and handed me the entire architecture of his reasoning, calm as a weather report, and I've turned over every sentence of it since. Somebody had to be here, he opened. You sent $400 a month. I changed my own mother's diapers for 19 months. Which one of those do you figure cost more? And here's the one that still wakes me at 2 in the morning. In this town, Marin, whoever stays gets the house. Whoever leaves gets a photo on the mantle. I didn't invent that rule. He wiped his hands on a shop rag, walked to the workbench, and came back holding an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $60,000, and stapled behind it, a release form with a date already typed onto it. Your share, he said. Take it and we're square. I stared at that release for a long time, not at the number, at the date. Because the date was 3 days before I'd even crossed the state line. He'd printed it before I got home. He'd known exactly what I would want, and had a document sitting ready, which meant that somewhere in his own head, my father had already had this entire conversation with me, and had already won it, and had already forgiven himself for it. I didn't take the check. I asked him one question: when did you print this? And my father, the single most honest man I have ever known, looked down at the floor of his own garage and said nothing at all. My niece Casey ambushed me in the church parking lot 2 days later, which is exactly where 13-year-olds conduct their business in this town. Dana's daughter, born when my sister was 17, practically raised in the back booth of every restaurant Dana ever waited tables in. She had a shoebox tucked under one arm, and she shoved it at me like it was on fire. Great-grandma's stuff, she said. I grabbed it when they cleaned out the house. Nobody knows I have it. Inside was a button, a dead kitchen timer, and a photograph. Casey and I share something nobody else in my family knows about, and I've never told a single soul until right now. During my 9 months in Poland, Casey texted me 61 times about absolutely nothing. A boy named Dev, her math teacher, whether an axolotl technically counts as a lizard at 2 in the morning her time, because she never once did the math on the 6-hour difference. I answered every single one, from a latrine, from a cot, from the back of a supply truck. Those were the only conversations I had that entire rotation where somebody actually wanted me, and not something from me. She stood there kicking a stray piece of gravel across the asphalt. Then she asked the only honest question anyone in my family had the nerve to ask me directly. Are you going to wreck my mom's restaurant? I could have lied. She was 13. It would have been easy and it would have been kind, and I couldn't make myself do it. I don't know, Casey, I said. She nodded like an adult, because in every way that mattered she already was one. Then she said, if you do it, stop texting me. And she ran the way you only run at 13, right after you've said the biggest thing you'll say all year. I ate at the restaurant, of course I did. I sat at the counter on a slow Thursday at noon and watched my sister work, and I'm going to tell you something that doesn't help my case one bit. Dana is good, not competent good. She stood at that pass for 2 straight hours without once stopping, never lost the ticket rail, called all 19 of her staff by name. She knew which line cook was 90 days sober and checked in with him in a voice nobody else could overhear. She knew which server had a kid with an ear infection and sent her home at 1, then covered the section herself. Her forearms are a topographic map of old burns. My sister has worked 80-hour weeks since she was 15 years old. Whatever picture you're forming right now, some spoiled woman handed a restaurant on a plate, set it down. Nobody has ever handed Dana one single thing in her entire life. She takes it herself. Then she spotted me, and her whole face came apart with genuine joy. No performance in it anywhere. She came around the counter and hugged me hard enough to knock my stool sideways, then pulled back with both hands on my shoulders. You see it, I named it for Grandma. The whole town says her name every single day now. The whole town says her name every day. My sister had paid our dead grandmother back in a single noun. She'd used. June's house, June's money, and June's name, and genuinely believed she'd built a monument. She was so proud of it she was nearly in tears. I sat there and looked past her shoulder at a brand new $16,000 range and did quiet math on the stove I'd personally helped buy 3 years earlier, $2,200, wired in from a base in Georgia. If you've ever quietly funded a life you were never actually invited into, tell me in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know I'm not the only one. The County Register of Deeds sits in a basement in Cadillac's Twin City 40 minutes south, behind a public counter staffed by a woman named Dot who's worked there since before I was born. Certified copies cost $4. That's the price tag on finding out exactly what your own family did to you. $4 and about 9 minutes. There it all was. Warranty deed, March of last year. From the estate of June M. Colby by Walter R. Colby, personal representative, to a buyer named Russ Ashford, $55,000. Recorded right alongside it, the consent, dated February 12th, same blockprint signature. I stood at that counter and did something I don't recommend to anyone. I pulled up my own duty log on my phone and looked up February 12th. 6-hour time difference. While my father sat in a title company's conference room signing my name onto a document giving away my grandmother's house, I was an ocean away in a treatment room, putting 11 stitches into the forearm of a specialist named Ruiz, who was far more worried about his mother finding out than about the arm itself. That's what I was doing. That's exactly where I was. While he signed my name, I was holding somebody's arm together. I've thought about that a great deal since. Dot asked if I needed anything else. I said no, thank you, walked out to the parking lot and sat in my truck. Then I did the only thing I could think to do. I opened my phone and called a lawyer, because I had absolutely no idea who else to call. Nora Whitfield keeps 2 rooms above a physical therapy clinic, carpet from a decade nobody misses, and a coffee maker older than my truck. She's 46, and she handles probate in a county where probate mostly means arguing over who inherits a snowmobile. She isn't a hero. There's no scene later where Nora Whitfield stands up and delivers a speech. She read the file for 9 straight minutes without saying a word, took off her glasses, and told me the cruelest true thing anyone told me all year. I can't get you the house, not ever, not in any version of this. Ashford bought it clean. He paid market rate, went through a title company, had no notice of any dispute whatsoever. The law protects him completely, and honestly, it should. Then she looked at me over the top of the file. Don't hire me if that's what you're actually after. I sat in that chair and felt the floor drop away because the house was the whole point. The actual pine, the actual dock, the actual place my grandmother said would be somewhere for me to come back to. And it was gone. Not stolen, not recoverable, not pending. Just gone the way a person is gone. Somebody else's kids had a swing set on it now. I told her I didn't know what I wanted anymore, which for me is basically a medical emergency. Nora pushed her glasses back up her nose and said the sentence that rerouted the next year of my life. But the money didn't evaporate, Sergeant. Money leaves a trail, and your father wrote every bit of it down himself. Cedar Lake sits 22 miles out of town, 35 minutes on a road I could drive with my eyes shut and have. Late August, that low northern light that makes everything look like a memory of itself before it's even finished happening. They'd repainted the cedar siding gray my whole life, now a soft, unfamiliar blue. A new dock. A swing set standing exactly where my grandmother's raspberry canes used to be. I parked, climbed the porch steps I once fell down at age 7, and I took the little brass key off my dog tag chain, the one mailed all the way to Kandahar, and put it in the lock. It slid in. It did not turn. I tried it 3 more times slowly, like it was a mechanical problem and not a message. It went in and it stopped. I stood on that porch holding a real key to a real promise that opened absolutely nothing. If you want the whole of my family summed up in a single object, that's it. There is no lock on gratitude. Then the door opened from the inside. Russ Ashford is 57, dish towel slung over one shoulder, and he didn't call the police on the stranger standing on his porch. He looked at the key in my hand, then at my face, and said, "You're the granddaughter." He poured me a cup of coffee and let me sit on his own porch for 20 minutes. Somewhere in there, he said the single most devastating sentence of the entire year, and he said it kindly, with absolutely no idea what he was doing. Your dad, T. Old me, the whole family had already signed off. He had a paper with your name right on it. I even asked him about it. He asked. A total stranger asked the question none of my own family ever did. I got in my truck, made it to the end of the driveway, put it in park, and for about 90 seconds I fell apart completely. That was the only time. Then I wiped my face, pulled back onto the road, and instead of turning south toward Kentucky, I turned north into Birch Hollow. I had spent 12 years being the one who leaves. I was about to find out I was terrible at the opposite. Staying, as it turns out, is mostly a paperwork problem. I burned through my accrued leave first, then ordinary leave, then had a conversation with my first sergeant about leave without pay that I'd rather not repeat here. I rented a single room above the hardware store on Main Street for $340 a month, one window, a hot plate, a shared bathroom down the hall with a water heater that offered about 4 minutes of opinion before giving out entirely. That window looked straight down onto the front of June's table. So every night from bed, I could watch my grandmother's face glowing from below like some kind of saint, selling burgers on the exact street she'd complained about for half a century. I didn't have a plan, and I want to be honest about that, because people hear stories like this and assume I arrived with a strategy. I hadn't. I had a rented room, a hot plate, and the entirely unfamiliar sensation of being physically present in a town that had gotten thoroughly used to me being a roomer. That was the whole of it. It turned out to be the only thing I owned that was actually worth anything, though I didn't know it yet, and neither did anyone else. My mother called on the fourth day, not to ask how I was doing. People at church are starting to talk, she said. How long are you planning on staying? And I told her the truest thing I'd said to my mother in 12 years. I don't know. The silence on that line ran so long I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped, because my mother had no script prepared for that answer. She had a script for the daughter who visits, and a script for the daughter who's far away and worth being proud of. She had nothing at all for a daughter who was simply, indefinitely, going to be there. Neither did anyone else in my family. Within a week, the entire town had changed the way it said hello to me. Nora filed the petition in September. It asked the county probate court for 3 things. First, that the consent be declared void, because an agent acting under a power of attorney owes a fiduciary duty to the person who granted it, and cannot use that authority to benefit himself or other family members. That isn't a technicality, that's the entire point of the document. Second, a full accounting of the estate. Third, a constructive trust over whatever remained of the money, wherever it had ended up. The clerk stamped it at 11:20 on a Tuesday morning. I stood right there and watched. It's a small, wet, ugly sound. That stamp, the exact sound of a family turning into a case number. That was the end of any version of this story where we simply talked it out over a kitchen table. My father reacted exactly the way I should have predicted and somehow didn't. He didn't call. He didn't shout. He didn't send a lawyer's letter to my rented room. He simply stopped acknowledging that I existed cleanly, completely, like flipping a breaker. I passed him at the gas station on Holly Street, and he looked straight through me, capped the nozzle, and drove off without a flicker of recognition. He wasn't performing. He wasn't making a point. He had simply deleted me for 4 months straight. My father didn't fight me. He just fell back on the only move he'd ever practiced, pretending I wasn't in the state at all. And the part I couldn't say out loud to Nora, or to anyone else, was that he'd learned that particular move from watching me do it for 12 straight years. The first person to call after we filed wasn't my father. It was nobody. Casey's shoebox sat on the floor of my rented room for 3 weeks before I could bring myself to open it. A button off a cardigan, a kitchen timer dead since roughly 2004, and a photograph. Me at 9 years old, standing on the Centerline dock in a swimsuit 2 sizes too big, holding up a smallmouth bass roughly the size of a wallet, missing both front teeth, grinning like I'd personally invented fishing. My grandmother took that photo. I remember the exact moment. On the back, in that same heavy slanted pencil pressed through the paper, she'd written something. Not a will, not a codicil. Nothing a court would ever glance at for even a second. And I need you to understand that clearly, because this is a story about a legal case, and this particular detail never became evidence. Nora never even saw it. Rin, 1999, she'll be the one who leaves. Make sure S. He has somewhere to come back to. She wrote that when I was 9 years old. Before the army. Before the wire transfers. Before any of it. My grandmother looked at a gap-toothed kid holding a fish off a dock and saw the whole rest of it coming, clear as anything. Then she spent the next 20 years quietly trying to buy me an exit ramp, wrote it into her will in pencil pressed through 3 sheets, and my own family sold it in 11 months to buy a stove. That's when I finally understood what she'd meant on that dock. She hadn't been warning me about strangers at all. She'd been watching her own sons start to keep count. I waited for my mother in the church parking lot after the late service, which is a cheap move, and I did it anyway. She came out carrying her tote bag and bulletin, saw me, and her expression did something complicated. I did the hardest thing I'd done in my adult life, harder than the courtroom, harder than any of it, and it took about 4 seconds, though I'd rehearsed it for 2 days straight. Mom, I need you to say it to me, just once. Say, Grandma left it to you. My mother looked at me with total, uncomplicated love. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. She reached up, touched my face, and said, Honey, we're so proud of you, you know that. But your father was here. And there it was. That was the answer. My mother's response to a question about a will was a compliment. She never said no. Nobody in my family has ever once said no to me directly. They simply hand you a nice word and go find their car keys. She reached her car, opened the door, then stopped and turned back around and said the sentence that would still be sitting in my chest 4 months later, in a courtroom. Don't make me choose, Marin. She'd already chosen. She'd chosen long before I ever landed in the state. She only wanted me to be the one to say it out loud, so that when it all fell apart, it could be my fault instead of anyone else's. That's how it works in my family. Somebody else does the taking. You're the one who does the asking. And then you're the one who ruined Christmas. Here's where I have to admit something ugly about myself. So stay with me. If you've made it this far, you already know this was never really a story about a house. Hit subscribe, and let's keep going, because the worst part is the part I did entirely on purpose. Discovery arrived in October, and it came straight from my father, because as personal representative he was legally required to produce the full estate accounting. He handed us the rope himself, filed neatly in a tabbed binder, because he still, genuinely, did not believe he'd done anything wrong. And there it was. On February 12th, the exact day he signed my name, my grandmother's estate was still holding $71,000 in certificates of deposit. It also still owned her old house in town, unsold, appraised at $96,000. Nobody was owed a single overdue cent. No creditor, no tax emergency, no reason on this earth to touch that lake house. And the law is unambiguous on this point. A piece of property specifically devised, left by name to one named person, is the very last asset an estate is permitted to touch. Last, behind the CDs, behind the second house, behind everything else. It only gets sold once there is truly nothing left, and there had been plenty left. The paper trail sat right there in his own handwriting. 55,000 in, 340,000 out to June's Table LLC memo line, family loan, no promissory note, no interest, no repayment schedule of any kind. 118,000 to Walter R. Colby memo line, caregiving reimbursement. 47,000 to fees and taxes. Nora set her pen down and looked at me. Do you understand what this means for the restaurant? No, I said. You will, she said. My sister came up the back stairwell of the hardware store at 11 at night, still in her apron, the whole stairwell smelling of fryer oil. She didn't beg, I want that clearly understood. Dana has never once begged for anything in her life. She was furious and articulate, and she had a real case to make. You left, she said, I stayed. I've been washing dishes in this town since I was 15. I was there when Grandma couldn't swallow anymore. I was there when Dad couldn't get her up off the floor at 4 in the morning and called me, and I came in my pajamas. Then she looked straight at me and put the knife exactly where it lived. And you sent checks, and you thought that made you the same as me. She had no idea what she'd just done. She'd reached directly into the one part of my chest I'd spent 12 years and roughly $60,000 building a wall around, and said it out loud, mid-stride, in a stairwell. Both halves of that were true at once. Nobody tells you that part. I asked her the only question I actually had. Do you know where that money came from? Dana stopped, 2 full seconds too long in a WOMA. N who never hesitates on anything, who calls out tickets under fire without blinking. Then she said, Dad told me you agreed. She'd asked once. That's what those 2 seconds were. She asked one time, got the answer she wanted and stopped asking and went and bought a range. That isn't a conspiracy. It's worse than that. It's what most people actually do. She paused at the door, hand on the frame, and without turning around said, Don't do this. 19 people eat off that place. My father's attorney, a man named Perry Nash, was politely brutal to me for 2 hours in a conference room, in a way I expect I'll still remember at 80. He didn't need to attack me, he had a folder, and inside it were my own text messages, printed on letter paper and numbered in the corner like exhibits, because that's exactly what they were. He read them aloud slowly, in a pleasant tone, and asked after each one whether I'd written it. 2 years back, just handle it, I can't deal with this from here. July, whatever you think is best, I trust you. November, sending 400 today, sorry I can't do more. January, I don't think I can come tell Grandma I love her. 4 exhibits. Every one of them mine. Every one entirely real, nothing edited, nothing taken out of context. In 40 minutes, that man built an accurate portrait of me out of nothing but my own sentences. And it was accurate. It matched exactly the woman my father believed I was. That's the thing about the truth, it doesn't take sides. I sat there and answered yes. I wrote that yes, that's mine, yes, I said that. I watched whatever moral high ground I thought I'd been standing on walk straight out of the room. Across the table, my father didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He looked almost sorry for me and said, quietly, mostly to himself, the way you say something you've already said 10,000 times, somebody had to be here. I sat in the parking lot afterward, for 25 minutes, without turning the key. I texted Casey that night. No read receipt. The next day I sent her something small and dumb about her axolotl, the exact kind of thing that used to earn an instant reply from Poland at 2 in the morning, 9 straight months running. Nothing came back. On Thursday I drove past the middle school at 3:15, not to talk to her, just to see her. She was on the front steps with her friends, saw my truck, and turned her back to me on purpose, in front of everybody, the single most expensive thing a 13-year-old owns. That night a message came through from Dana's number. Stop texting my daughter. Underneath it, timestamped 1:14 in the morning, one final message came through from Casey's own phone before it went dark for good. I thought you were the good one. That was the last thing my niece ever said to me. 61 messages traded in a latrine in Poland, and that's exactly where it ended. I sat in my rented room with the lights off, staring out the window at my grandmother's face glowing on Main Street, and I want to tell you I had some clean, clarifying moment of resolve right then. I didn't. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed frame for a long time and didn't move an inch. That was the actual bottom, not the deposition, not the deed. A 13-year-old deciding I was the villain and being roughly 60% correct. The following morning, Perry Nash called Nora with a new number. $150,000, paid out over 5 years, in exchange for dismissing the petition, signing a release, and a mutual agreement never to speak of any of it again. Nora laid the offer on her desk between us and didn't try to sell it to me, didn't soften a word of it. This is real money, she said. You have $31,000 to your name. My retainer alone is $31,000. If you go forward and you lose, you walk away with nothing, and you still lose them. She set her glasses down entirely. As your attorney, I'm advising you to take it. My own lawyer told me to take the deal. That's exactly where I stood. There wasn't a single human being left in the state on my side of that table, not my mother, not my sister, not my niece, not my father, not even my own attorney. I sat with that offer for 6 hours in a rented room above a hardware store. $31,000 is 12 years of savings. It isn't much, and the reason it isn't much is that I'd already wired the rest of it, $400 at a time, straight into that very family. I wrote out the check for the entire retainer and slid it across her desk. Every dollar I owned, staked on a lawsuit my own attorney believed I would lose. Nora looked at the check a long moment before picking it up, and asked the only question actually worth asking. Why? And I told her the truest sentence I have ever spoken out loud, because they've never once had to hear me say no. November came, and my re-enlistment window opened and started quietly closing, and I let it. Master Sergeant Delaney called twice from Fort Halloway, and the second message he left simply said, "Colby, call me back. Don't do anything stupid." I listened to it and never called back. 12 years, the only thing on this earth I have ever been genuinely, unambiguously excellent at. And here's the part that took a courtroom to make clear to me: the Army was the only institution that ever took my leaving and gave it a different name. In the Army, leaving is called deployment. It arrives with orders, a flight manifest, a formal thank you, a ribbon. Everywhere else, it's simply called abandonment. For 12 years, I had been paying, in money, and in years, for the privilege of being gone in a way nobody was allowed to call gone. I folded my uniforms one last time, sharp corners, packed the duffel, and shoved it under the bed in a rented room above a hardware store in the exact town I'd fled at 22. And then I was simply a woman who wouldn't go home. There's no ribbon for that. Nobody says thank you for that one. The window closed on a Friday. The following Monday, the court set the hearing for the second week of January. 2 in the morning, the night before the hearing, legal pad on my knees. Nora's instructions had been simple and entirely correct. Don't concede anything. Nash will try to make you admit you abandoned them. Answer short. Answer narrow. Don't hand it to him. That's good lawyering. That's exactly what $31,000 buys you. I sat there with the photograph from the shoebox propped against the lamp, me at 9, gap-toothed, holding up that fish, and heard my grandmother on that dock as clearly as if she were standing in the room. Don't let them pay you in nice words, Rin. And I understood something deeply inconvenient about the room I'd be walking into in 7 hours. Every single person in that courtroom had stayed somewhere, for someone, at some point in their life. The judge, the clerk, the bailiff, 2 strangers waiting on the next case. Every one of them had a mother or father or brother they'd once sat beside through something hard, and every one of them had been paid for it in precisely nothing. They would hear my father say somebody had to be here, and they would feel it land somewhere in their own spine. If I stood up there and fought the part of his story that was actually true, they would bury me for it, and they'd be right too. I couldn't be believed about the second half of this if I lied about the first half. So I tore off everything I'd written, and on a clean page I wrote a single sentence and stared at it for the better part of an hour. Nora had told me not to hand them the one thing they were hoping for. At 2 in the morning, I decided to hand it to them myself, out loud, on the record, before anyone else could take it from me, and hope it bought me the only thing I genuinely needed. The county probate courtroom is small. People picture marble. This was 4 rows of pews, low ceiling, yellowed wood paneling straight out of the 70s, and a steam radiator that clanked like someone was trapped inside it with a wrench. Judge Arlen Reyes is in his 60s, unhurried, courteous, and entirely unimpressed by anyone in the building. My mother sat in the second row. Dana sat beside her, still in her kitchen clogs because she doesn't own another pair of shoes. Casey wasn't there. My father sat in the front row across the aisle in a pressed button-down shirt, because that's what you wear out of respect for a proceeding, in his opinion. Nash put him on the stand and let him talk about 19 months. My father described learning how to lift his own mother without hurting her, which is a real skill and takes roughly 3 weeks to master. I know because I've taught it. He described crushing pills into applesauce. He described lying awake in the next room, listening for the sound of her choking, a sound you cannot describe to anyone who hasn't heard it, and never need to describe to anyone who has. Then he said the sentence that finished off the whole room. There was one night, he said, when he sat in his own driveway for 40 minutes, unable to make himself walk through the front door, and then he walked through it anyway, because if I don't go in, nobody goes in. My father, the most honest man alive, put one of those big cracked hands over his face in front of the entire county and couldn't speak for a while. That courtroom believed every word of it. Here's what I've never told anyone. So did I. I'm a medic. I know exactly, down to the last detail, what 19 months of that costs in a way nobody else in that room possibly could. I couldn't fight him on it. I didn't even want to. Then Nash asked if he had any regrets. My father wiped his face and said, "I regret that my daughter wasn't here." Even in tears, he was still writing the invoice. I looked around that little room and understood, plainly, that I was losing. Every person in it had stayed some. Where nobody in it had ever been paid for it. Nora called me up. I sat. I took the oath. Across the room, Nash squared his 4 sheets of paper, my own text messages, ready to fire. I didn't wait for the first question. I looked directly at Judge Reyes and said it. Your Honor, before we start, my father is right. I stayed away. I couldn't stand being in that house without her, and I let him carry all of it alone for 19 months, and I sent money instead of showing up. Everything he's told you about me is true, and I'd like that entered into the record. I let it sit a second because I'd rehearsed that part. Then I said the rest. It does not make my grandmother's will a suggestion. The radiator clanked. Nobody moved. Perry Nash had spent 4 months building a house out of 4 sheets of paper, and I had just walked over and handed him the bricks, and now there was nothing left in that folder that could touch me, because I'd already said the worst of it myself, in my own voice, before he ever got the chance. I felt the old version of me, the daughter who was simply away on duty, blameless, absent through no fault of her own, die right there on the record. I don't have a gentler way to put it. I killed her myself with a single sentence, and there is no getting her back. Then Nora did the only thing that actually mattered in 11 months. She recalled my father to the stand and asked 3 questions. Mr. Colby, did you ask your daughter before signing her name? No. Did you call her, text her, email her? She had internet in Poland, didn't she? A long pause, yes. Then why didn't you ask her? My father looked at me, right at me, across that small room, and answered honestly, because he is an honest man, and because he believed with his entire chest that it was the correct answer. Because she wasn't here. And Nora said, very quietly, without any theater at all, Your Honor, my client is sitting in the front row. That was the case, all of it. Not a smoking gun, not some secret document falling out of an envelope. My father's entire legal position, the thing that had let him put his own pen to my name, was that I was permanently, reliably, forever absent. 12 years of evidence supported that belief. He wasn't wrong to hold it. And the only thing on earth that could break it was something I couldn't wire, couldn't sign over, couldn't send in my place. My own body in the room. Judge Reyes tapped his pen twice against the file. I'll rule after lunch. At 1:40, he came back and read the ruling slowly, without any drama, the way you'd read out a parts list. But first, he did a small, polite thing, with absolutely no idea he was doing anything at all. He looked up over his glasses and said, Sergeant Colby, before I rule, thank you for your service. And I sat there in that pew and heard it land. The same exact sentence my sister had sent me off a scaffold in May. The same sentence the girl at the register says every morning ringing up my coffee. The same sentence now, from a man in a robe holding the power to hand my grandmother's estate back to me or take it away permanently. Free, unlimited, available everywhere forever, and that is precisely why they hand it to you instead of anything real. Then he ruled. The consent was void. An agent under a power of attorney owes a fiduciary duty to his principal, and Walter Colby had used his daughter's power of attorney in a transaction benefiting himself and his other daughter. That is self-dealing, and it is void, and the court said so in one flat sentence without looking up. The personal representative had breached his duty by selling specifically devised property, while the estate held $71,000 in liquid assets and an unsold house, with no creditor pressing and no necessity whatsoever. The property itself was not recoverable. Russ Ashford was a bona fide purchaser, his title stood, and that door stays blue forever. But the proceeds were impressed with a constructive trust in favor of the petitioner, a trust that reached into the assets and equity of June's Table LLC. My sister came out of her chair. Not fainted, her legs simply stopped participating and she slid to the floor. My mother caught her under one arm. Someone in the back said, "Oh my God," out loud. Judge Reyes tapped his gavel once, gently, the way you tap a table to bring a room back to itself. Then he did the procedural thing that turned my win into a knife. Counsel, the court will not permit double recovery. Your client will elect her remedy, on the record, today. I had wanted, for 11 months, for somebody to hand me the thing that was actually mine. He handed it to me, and in the same breath asked me who I wanted it to cost. Nora turned to me fast and quiet because we had roughly 90 seconds. Door 1, a money judgment against my father personally, the remaining $118,000, plus the house on Holly Street, worth about 150. That door pulls my parents out of the house they've lived in since before I was born, at 63 and 61, and it leaves my sister her restaurant. Door 2. The Constructive Trust, June's Table LLC itself, the building, the equity, the equipment, all of it. That door makes me whole, exactly to the dollar my grandmother intended, and erases the only thing my sister has ever built with her own hands, and puts 19 people out of work, and lets my parents keep their house. 90 seconds, Nora said, choose. I looked down at the table. The blue binder sat open in evidence to page 6, my father's block printing pressed clean through the paper. Reimbursement for caregiving, 19 months, $118,000. My phone lay face up in my lap, open to my own transfer history because I'd been checking it in the hallway. 400, 400, 400, 6,000 for the roof, 2,200 for the stove, 400, 400. 12 years of it, scrolling on forever, 2 columns of numbers in the same handwriting. My father had billed for showing up. I had been billing for staying away. Neither one of us had really been present in this family since before I turned 22. We'd simply both been invoicing it. From the second row, my mother said something so quietly I was the only one in the room who heard it, and she wasn't angry, she was simply telling me the price. If you do this, don't come back. And my father, who hadn't looked at me in 4 straight months, said it once more to the empty air in front of him. Somebody had to be here. I answered him, not sharp, not clever, I had nothing clever left. This is the most important sentence I said in 11 months, and it isn't a comeback, it's a surrender. I know, Dad, that's the part I can't argue with. Then, from a dock in September, from a woman who saw all of this coming when I was 9 years old holding up a fish. Don't let them pay you in nice words, Rin. I stood up. That courtroom is old enough that the pews creak, so everyone heard me rise. There was no quiet way to do this. My sister was breathing the way people breathe right before they go down, and I counted it because I'm a medic and I cannot not count it. Even hers. Your Honor, the petitioner elects the constructive trust. I took the restaurant, and I want you to understand exactly what happened in that single second, both halves of it, at once. I got my grandmother's estate made whole, on the record, with a judge's signature behind it. And I got something I had never once gone looking for. For the first time in 34 years, I had asked my family for something instead of sending them something. The taking was the showing up. It was the exact same act. And in that same second, I lost my mother, on purpose, wide awake. I lost my sister. I lost Casey. I lost the one thing I'd actually walked into that courtroom to protect, my own idea of myself as the good one, the one who never asks for anything. I walked out of that courtroom as a woman I'm not entirely sure I like. And here's the joke my grandmother would have loved most. I won a restaurant in Birch Hollow, which means the court, in all its wisdom, sentenced me to show up in person, every single day, in the one town I'd spent 12 years and 2 continents running from. I got the exact thing I'd been hiding from my whole life. The transfer took 6 weeks, paperwork, an accountant, a receiver, a woman with a clipboard measuring the walk-in cooler. My sister didn't fight any of it. On the last day she came in at 6 in the morning, hung her apron on the hook by the office door, set her keys down on the cutting board and walked out the front without a word. Dana has never spoken to me again. Not once, not since. There's no later scene where she does. I kept all 19 employees, not out of generosity, but because I can't cook. I can close 11 stitches in a moving vehicle. I cannot make a hollandaise. Keeping those people was the only decision available to me that didn't require asking anyone's permission. My father kept the house on Holly Street. I want that on the record too. I let him keep it, and the way I let him keep it was by taking it out of my sister's hands instead. I have never once managed to make that math feel clean. He never thanked me, he's never called. I passed him at the hardware store in April and he looked straight through me, paid for his washers and left exactly what I did to him for 12 years. He learned it from me. Casey said nothing. My mother's church closed around her like a fist. Around town, I'm the Colby girl who sued her own father. That's what I'll be at my own funeral, and it isn't even inaccurate. The girl at the counter still tells me thank you for my service, every single time she rings up my coffee. Cheerful every time. She has never once invited me over for dinner and she never will. There's nothing wrong with her. That's simply the D.L. My grandmother is still dead. The lake house door is still blue. Russ Ashford has a swing set where the raspberry canes used to grow, and he's entirely entitled to it. None of this fixed anything. The thing I went up against didn't lose an inch of ground anywhere else in the county. So at 35, I was out of the army. No career, no savings, no family. Standing in a kitchen I never once wanted, in a town I'd fled at 22. In March, it rained 9 straight days. On the 6th one, I borrowed a ladder from the hardware store, set it up on the sidewalk out front of my own building, and took my grandmother's name down myself, one letter at a time. Gold screws already starting to rust, my hands going numb, water running off the awning and down the back of my collar. It took 2 hours. Not because I hated my sister, because my grandmother's name was the last thing this family still had left to spend, and I was done paying anyone in names. I left the board blank. People ask what's going up next, and I tell them I haven't thought of one yet, which is a lie. I'm simply finished paying in names. I took the little brass key off my chain and set it in the drawer under the register, where it still doesn't open a single thing, and it doesn't have to anymore. In April, my niece pushed the door open at 4 in the afternoon and didn't say one word to me. She walked straight to a dirty two-top, wiped it down, and squared the chairs exactly the way her great-grandmother used to. Then she left. No hug, no forgiveness, nothing at all. She came back the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that. They will never run out of nice words. That's the entire trick of them. They cost nothing to produce and they never go out of stock. So if somebody owes you a piece of your own life back, don't stand around waiting to be thanked for it. Walk into the room, make them look at you, and say the number out loud. Because the one thing on this earth you can never mail home, never sign over to someone else, and never truly be repaid for ingratitude is your own body, standing in the doorway. A brass key that opens nothing. A handwritten invoice for 19 months. Gold letters coming down in the rain. If you've ever been paid in pride, and told it was a gift, then you already know exactly what my sister's forward text cost her. Tell me in the comments, would you have taken the trust, or let them keep it? And subscribe, because next week, somebody else finally stops being grateful.